The following recording has been compiled from Mark Window's episode, Israel, Pawns in the Game, in Haim Bamont's 1977 book, Israel. It is believed, due to land and natural resources on and offshore, that the forced displacement and/or extermination of the entire Palestinian population would be the ideal end goal for Israel's greater project in the region. Something Israel's government refutes. However, we have seen a lot of denial of the facts from the current state of Israel over the last many months and years. The United States and many Western powers alike have long been connected and complicit in Israel's actions in Gaza, the West Bank, and other areas in the region. However, many nation-states are turning against Israel. Has time run out for the modern state of Israel? From a global viewpoint, the modern-day state of Israel is now a problem. It appears that it is being allowed to destroy itself along with the Palestinian populations it controls. Israel, now a nation-state, was populated first by mainly illegal immigrants from Russia, known as the first waves of Aliyah, the return home. As Haim Bamont stated, Israel was not a place for those identifying as Jews needed to go. It was a place they could go if they wanted to. Therefore, Israel was an ideology and attracted ideologists. The Zionists had turned down a state in Africa, in Madagascar. In 1905, a delegation sent to inspect the African plateau found it to be too dangerous, filled with lions and other creatures. The idealists of Zionism wanted the modern-day Jerusalem and believed the story they had adopted through religious belief. Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon were experiencing sovereignty by 1936, and the Arabs in Palestine wanted their own independence. They certainly didn't want any notion of a national Jewish state in their home. By 1936, the influx of Jewish illegal immigrants into Palestine had increased massively, over 40,000 in 1934 and 60,000 in 1935. The British went some way in mediating with the Arabs and trying to restrict illegal immigration and also the appropriation of Palestinian land, often by underhand means or by any means possible. And this was not popular with the Jewish agency in Palestine. What we are looking at here is the British as mediators, and we're going to get into the story of Israel and really what happened when it began to grow as a nation state. Let's go back to that formation period and compare it with now to get an overview. Today, Israel is acting much in the same way as Abraham Stern, a Polish immigrant who believed that the Palestinians had no status in Palestine and that the new state in Palestine, called Israel, was his homeland and was solely for Zionists. It never occurred to this Polish immigrant that his nation state was Poland and the Palestinian nation state should be Palestine, and such was the intensity and idealism of Zionism. Abraham Stern and his group believed that all Jews were Zionists, and only Zionists should exist in Palestine, or what is now called the modern-day state of Israel, founded in 1948. Abraham Stern came to Israel in 1925, and he became an outstanding student in humanities. He joined a militant group called the Haganah. The Haganah was established in June 1920 by the Labor Zionist Party in response to the Arab riots of 1920 and 1921. The word Haganah is Hebrew for defense. Now we often see this coming up, with Israel using the word defense when they are in fact attacking. The current Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu's speeches are full of this kind of rhetoric, and there is the allegation of anti-Semitism when anyone criticizes what the modern-day state of Israel is doing. The Haganah were too much of a mediator group for Abraham Stern, as they sometimes collaborated with the British, who he had defined as the enemy, along with all Palestinians. Stern was notable for his fanaticism in the armed struggle for Jewish independence, which he believed could succeed only if conducted by an underground force, independent of all legal bodies. So in effect, Stern was a revolutionary inspired by fanaticism. In 1931, a group of Haganah fighters, rejecting what they deemed was moderation and restraint in the fight for Jewish independence, broke away from the Haganah group. They formed a paramilitary resistance movement of their own, known as the Irgun. Stern, whose views had become much more militant following the Arab riots of 1929, became an active member of the Irgun. In 1934, Stern was sent by the Irgun on missions to Poland and other European countries to purchase weapons and also to arrange for their shipment to Israel. In 1935, he obtained the first 2 Finnish-made machine guns, shipping them in double-sided boilers over to Israel. Other weapons were transported in suitcases and crates belonging to immigrants going into Israel. Now, of course, we have to remember that immigrants went from Russia to Cyprus, then to Israel, as did the weapons. Stern viewed the British more than the Arabs as the primary enemy of the Jews and the principal obstacle to Jewish independence. He advocated an armed struggle against the British. He compiled a manual on the use of the revolver, the first of its kind to be printed in Hebrew. In 1933, he wrote the poem Anonymous Soldiers, which became the anthem first of the Irgun and later of the Lehi, a collection of Stern's underground poetry, mostly relating to dedication and self-sacrifice, and this longing for a sovereign Israel, was published after his death. After concluding an agreement with the Polish government in 1938, arms acquisitions were accelerated. The weapons were transferred under Polish army supervision to Irgun warehouses in Warsaw, then transported into Israel. Stern later broke off from the Irgun to create the paramilitary group called the Lehi, also known as the Stern Gang. They robbed banks to fund their operations and killed people who got in their way, including British, Arabs, and Jews in the region. They became very unpopular to supporters of the Haganah and also to most Jews at the time. Irgun leaders had decided there would be no war with Britain until the end of the Second World War. The massacres of Palestinians, however, continued, including the Deir Yassin massacre and many more, which were in fact worse, where entire Palestinian villages were wiped out. The Lehi were responsible for the bombing of the police station in Tel Aviv, with a device that exploded in a truck, killing several people. In 1939, the British police in Palestine actually captured leaders of the Irgun the day before World War II started. Abraham Stern's motto was, "My enemy's enemy is my friend." Stern had wanted to form alliances with Hitler against the British. He believed Jews should be forced to return to Israel and that the Nazis would assist in this. His offer was sent to the German embassy in Beirut, but there was never a reply. Stern wanted Jews out of Germany and thought that Hitler would help him. Both Stern and Ben-Gurion were fascinated by Italian fascism, and Ben-Gurion had met with fascists in Italy. It was hoped that the Jerusalem Agreement to dissolve the diaspora of Jews would help to force the Jews into Palestine. And what has to be remembered is that the middle-class Jews in Europe and America were generally settled, and it was illegal immigrants and Zionist idealists who were first on the soil of the new state of Israel. Exchanging the comfortable life in New York or London for a dangerous desert area was not at all attractive. Stern's message to the Italian fascists were actually intercepted. In fact, he had been inadvertently communicating with the Irgun, who had now become his rivals after breaking off and forming the Lehi. The Palestinian leader had already met with Hitler by this time as well. The massacre at Deir Yassin had escalated the exodus of Palestinians as all 3 Israeli militant groups, the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Lehi were all involved in a show of Zionist solidarity. The Arab War of 1938 was used to expel even more Palestinians. Land was taken, which was said to have been abandoned, and others were violently forced off their land. It had also been the method of General Ord Wingate fighting for the British, who was a devout Zionist. His idea was the precautionary principle of killing Palestinians in their beds before they could become terrorists. This was the antidote to any resistance, and by now the State of Israel was embarked on its ongoing ethnic cleansing and appropriation of all Palestinian land. The capture of Abraham Stern was by pure chance. It was through 2 injured soldiers in Haifa Hospital. One of the wives of the soldiers was harboring Stern in her apartment, and this slipped out in a conversation in the hospital. British Army officer Thomas Wilkin apprehended Abraham Stern, and he was then shot dead by Major Morton on the 12th of February 1942 at the age of 34. In 1938, the defining message of Stern's revolutionary Zionism came about in the bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. The British administrative headquarters for Mandatory Palestine was housed in the southern wing of the hotel and was bombed in a terrorist attack on the 22nd of July 1946 by the Zionist underground organization Irgun. During the Jewish insurgency, 91 people of various nationalities were killed, including Arabs, Britons, and Jews, and 46 were injured. The King David Hotel massacre, where Jews dressed as Arabs and blew up the hotel, was a defining moment, and it was really the outcome of the revolutionary Zionism of the likes of Abraham Stern. The hotel was the site of the central offices of the British Mandatory Authorities of Palestine, principally the Secretariat of the Government of Palestine and the headquarters of the British Armed Forces in Palestine and Transjordan. This was an attack at the heart of Britain and Palestine. When planned, the attack had the approval of the Haganah, the principal Jewish paramilitary group in Palestine, though, unbeknownst to the Irgun, this had been canceled by the time the operation was carried out. So in other words, the Haganah did not want to be involved. At the last minute, they wanted to pull out, but it was too late. The main motive of the bombing was to destroy documents incriminating the Jewish agency and attacks against the British, which were obtained during Operation Agatha, a series of raids by British Mandate authorities. It was the deadliest attack directed at the British during the Mandate era, between 1920 and 1948. The attack was carried out by Israelis disguised as Arab workmen and as hotel waiters. Members of the Irgun planted a bomb in the basement in the main building of the hotel, whose southern wing housed the Mandate Secretariat and a few offices of the British military headquarters. The resulting explosion caused the collapse of the western half of the southern wing of the hotel. You can see photos of it if you look on the internet. It destroyed half the hotel. Some of the deaths and injuries occurred in the road outside the hotel in adjacent buildings. It was a massive explosion. There are reports of the bombs being brought into the hotel in milk churns. In November 1947, the United Nations recommended the partition of Palestine and the establishment of separate Arab and Jewish states. On the 15th of May 1948, Britain gave up her mandate and the British Army officially departed from Palestine. The ideology of Abraham Stern lives on in Israel today. It is expressed in the actions of the Israeli state. In 1948, when members of the Jewish underground organization Lehi killed UN peace mediator Count Foch Bernadotte in response to his efforts to modify the Palestinian partition plan, there was outrage. Bernadotte was a Swede with family ties to the Swedish king and had gained international recognition through his work as head of the Swedish Red Cross during World War II. Bernadotte used his position to negotiate with SS officer Heinrich Himmler. and saved thousands of Jews from the concentration camps. His assassination was a move that was very unpopular with a lot of the newly formed population of Israel. We can see now the extremist Zionists were not representative of many of the people who are now populating the state of Israel. It was Yitzhak Shamir, former Prime Minister of Israel, who ordered this assassination. And today, the Zionist elitists still attempt to speak on behalf of all Jews. With modern-day Israel declaring wars with its neighbors and now openly wiping out the rest of Palestine, the beliefs of Abraham Stern are still evident in the actions of the nation-state. It is now clear that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is blindly leading Israel into total destruction, and the arrogance and neurosis present in his speeches shows he is oblivious to many world leaders turning against him, as he continues to lead Israel in what UN experts have deemed a genocidal war on Gaza and Palestinian civilian populations. Israel has also conducted recent bombing campaigns in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iran, resulting in thousands of civilian deaths. United Nations calls for a ceasefire have failed to stop the U.S.-backed attacks, which Netanyahu has vowed to continue. From an outside perspective, when the IDF commit war crimes and post the footage across social media, it is clear there is a blind arrogance and pathological hatred of the Palestinians, and it's there for all the world to see. The IDF have uploaded evidence of their own war crimes under their own names so they can be individually prosecuted. This is beyond what anybody would think possible in a war zone, and it's only the thing that you would expect from paid, undisciplined criminal mercenaries. They do not seem to understand that this sort of deranged and evil mockery of what are in effect victims is not acceptable by most, and more importantly, are crimes against humanity. Why would the IDF command even allow this to happen? Would any other army in the world be so strategically ignorant as to show off its war crimes on social media platforms? Everyone can research the war crimes and illegal actions of the Israeli state, but flaunting them on social media is only comparable to psychopathy. In other words, to be in denial of all one's criminal actions and to be completely unaware of the repercussions or consequences. And the real question is, has the modern-day state of Israel, which was bankrolled by Lord Rothschild, fulfilled its purpose as a strategic asset in the Middle East? It seems intent on destroying itself, but on the other hand, unaware that it will. Pride comes, of course, before a fall. As we continue to watch Israeli attacks against its neighboring countries, a continued genocide against Palestinians, and even attacks against its own citizens, as reported by UN findings and Israeli sources, the comparison of Israel today with the idealism of Abraham Stern and early paramilitary groups is quite relevant. One can only hope for an end to violence in the region, but since its inception as a nation-state, Israel has been in constant conflict with no end in sight.